I checked my reflection one last time in the bathroom mirror. My navy blue dress was professional yet elegant. My hair was neatly styled in a low bun, and I had applied just enough makeup to look polished without appearing as if I'd made too much effort. Tonight wasn't about appearances, though in academia, appearances were always somewhat relevant. No, tonight was about truth. Dr. Mercer? A voice called from outside. The ceremony is about to begin. Just a moment, I replied, sliding the USB drive into my clutch. My hands trembled slightly, but my resolve remained firm. 1 year's worth of research, hundreds of hours of translations, and countless sleepless nights had led to this moment. I followed the usher back to the grand ballroom of the Blackwell Hotel, where the economics department's annual faculty dinner was being held. Crystal chandeliers sparkled over tables draped in white linen, adorned with expensive floral arrangements that the university somehow justified despite the recent budget cuts to research funding. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Elena. I saved you a seat," called Sophia Kim, the new department chair. She waved from a table near the front, close to the podium where, in approximately 45 minutes, Dr. Walter Hargrove would accept his Lifetime Achievement Award. I weaved through the crowd toward her, nodding at familiar faces. Some offered sympathetic smiles, the kind reserved for a promising colleague whose career had inexplicably stalled. Others averted their eyes, perhaps feeling complicit in what had happened to me. A few seemed genuinely surprised to see me there. After all, why would I attend a celebration of the department that had denied me tenure just 9 months ago? "I'm so glad you came," Sophia whispered as I took my seat beside her. "It shows real class." If only she knew. "I wouldn't miss it," I said, smiling. "The department has been my home for 6 years. And should have remained so," she added, her expression darkening momentarily. Sophia had fought for me during the tenure review, but she'd been outvoted. Primarily due to one devastating assessment from the man of the hour. I scanned the room until I found him, Walter Hargrove, surrounded by admirers as always. At 60, he still commanded attention with his imposing height, silver hair, and the confident posture of a man who had never doubted his place in the world. He caught my eye briefly, his expression flickering with something: concern? Guilt? Irritation, before he turned back to his conversation. President Montgomery approached the podium, and the room fell silent. "Good evening, distinguished faculty, honored alumni, and cherished donors." I zoned out during the introductory remarks, mentally rehearsing what I would say. My pulse quickened as I observed the journalist from the Chronicle of Higher Education taking notes near the back. I had casually mentioned to her that tonight might yield an interesting story. Her presence was insurance, evidence presented only within these walls could be dismissed, buried, rationalized away. The academic world excelled at protecting its own. And now, Dr. Sophia Kim will introduce our honoree. Sophia squeezed my hand before standing. "You okay?" she whispered. "Perfect," I replied, as Sophia delivered her introduction, painting Walter as a pioneer in economic theory, a dedicated mentor, and a paragon of academic integrity. I removed the USB drive from my clutch and palmed it discreetly. I'd already confirmed with the AV technician that my presentation was loaded into the system as a surprise tribute to Dr. Hargrove. The technician, a former student who remembered my kindness when his mother fell ill, had been happy to assist. Whose seminal work on asymmetrical market behaviors revolutionized the field, Sophia continued. His 1989 paper Predictive Models for Market Irregularities has been cited over 2,000 times and forms the foundation of modern behavioral economics. I almost laughed. That paper, Walter's magnum opus, was precisely why I was here tonight. Applause erupted as Walter made his way to the podium, his steps measured and dignified. He adjusted his glasses, smiled warmly at the audience, and began his prepared remarks. I had to admit, he was good, humble yet authoritative, gracious yet commanding. Standing on the shoulders of giants, he was saying, but also blazing new trails, asking questions others hadn't thought to ask. My fingers gripped the edge of the table. Questions others hadn't thought to ask. The audacity was breathtaking. And to the young scholars in this room, I say, integrity is everything in our profession. Our work must be rigorous, transparent, and above all, honest. Beside me, Sophia nodded enthusiastically. Most of the room was captivated by the performance of the distinguished professor dispensing wisdom. Only I saw it for what it was, a masterclass in hypocrisy. Walter's speech concluded to a standing ovation. As people began to settle back into their seats, I rose. This wasn't part of the official program, but it wasn't unusual for former students or colleagues to offer impromptu tributes at such events. "Dr. Hargrove," I called, my voice stronger than I expected. "If I may add a few words?" He looked surprised but gestured magnanimously. "Of course, Dr. Mercer. The floor is yours." I approached the podium, passing within inches of him. He smelled of expensive cologne and privilege. "Thank you," I said, inserting my USB drive into the laptop connected to the projection system. "I'd like to offer a different perspective on Dr. Hargrove's contributions." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Walter remained standing nearby, his expression congenial, though I noticed a tightness around his eyes. "Dr. Hargrove just spoke eloquently about integrity," I began, clicking to the first slide. "About honesty and transparency in academia. About original thinking." The screen behind me displayed a split image, on the left, the title page of Walter's famous 1989 paper, on the right, a paper written in Polish dated 1987 by Dr. Marek Kowalski of Warsaw University. I'd spent weeks tracking down this paper in the archives. "I'd like to examine these values through the lens of Dr. Hargrove's most influential work," I continued, clicking to the next slide, which showed side-by-side paragraphs, one in Polish with my English translation beneath it, the other from Walter's paper. The similarities were unmistakable. A confused silence fell over the room. Walter stepped forward. "Dr. Mercer, I'm not sure what you're implying, but—" "I'm not implying anything, Dr. Hargrove. I'm stating facts." I moved to the next slide, then the next, each showing increasingly damning comparisons. Dr. Kowalski's work was never translated into English. His research was funded by a small grant and published in a regional journal with limited circulation. But the methodologies, the conclusions, even the specific examples used in your breakthrough paper, they're identical. Only the variable names have been changed. The room erupted in whispers. President Montgomery rose from his seat, his face ashen. "Dr. Mercer, this is highly inappropriate." "What's inappropriate?" I cut in, my voice rising, "is building a career on stolen work. What's inappropriate is denying tenure to a qualified candidate because you feared she might discover your secret." I clicked to a new slide showing Walter's scathing review of my tenure application alongside evidence of his systematic campaign against me. Walter's face had turned an alarming shade of red. "This is absurd. I've never even heard of this Kowalski person." "Then how do you explain this?" I displayed a photograph of a much younger Walter at an economics conference in Krakow in 1988, standing next to none other than Marek Kowalski. "Or the fact that you spent 3 months at Warsaw University as a visiting scholar that same year? Or that Dr. Kowalski died unexpectedly in 1989, just months before your paper was published?" The silence that followed was deafening. I could almost hear the calculations running through everyone's minds, the implications for the department, for the university, for grants and rankings and reputations. "Elena," Sophia whispered, having approached the podium. "That's enough." But it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. "I have provided the complete documentation to the University Ethics Committee," I announced, removing my USB drive. "And to the Chronicle of Higher Education." I nodded toward the journalist, who was frantically typing on her laptop. "The academic community deserves to know the truth about the work on which so many subsequent studies have been based." I stepped away from the podium, my legs barely supporting me. The room had dissolved into chaos, faculty members huddled in shocked conversations, administrators on phones, Walter himself surrounded by his longtime allies, his face a mask of indignation. "You've destroyed your career," he hissed as I passed him. "No one will hire you after this stunt." I paused and looked him directly in the eyes. "You already destroyed my career, Walter. I'm just making sure it wasn't for nothing." The aftermath was both exactly what I had expected and nothing like I had imagined. The university launched an investigation, placing Walter on administrative leave while they reviewed my evidence. The Chronicle published a front-page article within days, sending shockwaves through the academic community. Other publications followed suit. I received emails from colleagues around the world, some congratulatory, others condemning my methods if not my findings. Several expressed outrage that I had chosen to publicly humiliate a respected scholar rather than pursuing the matter through proper channels. As if I hadn't tried that route first, submitting my concerns confidentially to the ethics committee only to have them mysteriously delayed and eventually dismissed without investigation. Walter's supporters rallied around him, suggesting that any similarities were coincidental or that perhaps Kowalski had somehow plagiarized Walter's unpublished work. Others speculated that I had fabricated evidence out of bitterness over my tenure denial. The fact that multiple independent translators confirmed the accuracy of my translations seemed to matter little to those determined to defend the status quo. 3 weeks after the dinner, Sophia invited me to her office. "The investigation is nearly complete," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "It doesn't look good for Walter." I nodded, feeling hollow rather than vindicated. "The provost asked me to sound you out about a settlement of sorts." "A settlement?" "The university would offer you tenure, effective immediately, with back pay to cover the months since your denial." She toyed with a pen on her desk. "In exchange, you would sign an NDA regarding Walter's indiscretions. The official story would be that he's retiring early for health reasons." I stared at her, incredulous. "They want to cover it up. They want to minimize damage to the institution," she corrected gently. "Elena, this is your chance to get what you deserved all along." "At the cost of the truth?" Sophia sighed. "The truth is messy. Walter's work, regardless of its origins, has shaped economic theory for decades. Hundreds of papers have built upon his models. If he's officially declared a plagiarist, it calls all of that into question." "Perhaps it should be called into question," I replied. "And what about the department? Our rankings? Our funding? The careers of everyone who works here, including young faculty who had nothing to do with any of this?" I understood then what was happening. The institution was closing ranks, not around Walter specifically, but around itself. The revelation wasn't being evaluated on its merits but on its consequences. "I need time to think," I said finally. "Don't take too long," Sophia advised. "The provost is eager to resolve this before the board meeting next week." That evening, I received an unexpected visitor at my apartment. James Wallace, Walter's longtime friend and collaborator, stood awkwardly at my door holding a bottle of expensive scotch. "May I come in?" he asked. "I think we should talk." I hesitated but ultimately stepped aside. James had always been kind to me, even voting in favor of my tenure despite Walter's opposition. He settled onto my couch, opened the scotch, and poured 2 glasses without asking. I took one, more out of politeness than desire. "You've created quite a situation," he said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "Walter created the situation," I corrected. 30 years ago." James nodded slowly. "Yes, he did. And I suspected as much at the time." I nearly choked on my drink. "You knew?" "Not definitively. But I had my doubts." He took a long sip. "Walter came back from Poland with a sudden breakthrough that didn't align with his previous thinking. I questioned him about it once. He said inspiration can come from unexpected places." James gave a bitter laugh. "I chose to believe him because it was easier. Because we were building something important. Because I didn't want to know. And now? Now the evidence is irrefutable." He set down his glass. "I'm not here to defend him, Elena. I'm here to ask what you want." "I want justice." "No," he said, shaking his head. "Justice would have been Walter being exposed 30 years ago, before he built his career on that paper. Before others built their careers on his work. Before the department's reputation became so entwined with his contributions." What you want now is revenge. The accusation stung, partly because I feared it was true. Is it wrong to want him to face consequences for what he did? Not just to Kowalski, but to me? No, it's not wrong. James leaned forward. But ask yourself this, in destroying Walter, how much collateral damage are you willing to accept? And will it heal what was broken in you when he betrayed the principles of our profession? I had no answer for him. Before leaving, James placed a business card on my coffee table. A colleague at Princeton mentioned they have an opening in their economics department. They're impressed by your work, your actual work, not this controversy. It would be a fresh start. I stared at the card long after he left, the choice before me suddenly crystallizing. I could take Sophia's offer and become part of the very system I despised, complicit in its prioritization of appearance over truth. I could reject it and continue my crusade, possibly damaging countless innocent careers in the process. Or I could walk away entirely, taking the Princeton opportunity and leaving Blackwell to manage its own moral compromises. The next morning, I arrived at Sophia's office earlier than scheduled. She looked up from her computer, surprised. I've made my decision, I said without preamble. And? I won't sign an NDA. The investigation should proceed to its natural conclusion, whatever that may be. Sophia's face fell. Elena, please reconsider. This offer won't come again. I know. I placed a letter on her desk. That's my resignation, effective immediately. I've accepted a position at Princeton. You're leaving? After everything? Precisely because of everything. I sat down across from her. I exposed Walter because I believe truth matters in academia. If I accept this deal, I'm proving myself wrong. And the department? Your colleagues? They will adapt, as institutions always do. I managed a small smile. Blackwell University existed before Walter Hargrove and will continue without him. Without me too. Sophia studied my face for a long moment. You know, he still doesn't think he did anything wrong. In his mind, he improved on Kowalski's work by bringing it to a wider audience. That doesn't surprise me. I stood to leave. Some people never see the damage they cause, only the damage done to them. And you? What do you see? I paused at the door, considering. I see that institutions will always protect themselves first. Individual ethics are secondary to collective reputation. I can't change that system, but I don't have to participate in it either. 6 months later, I was in my office at Princeton when I received a small package. Inside was a worn academic journal with a Polish title and a post-it note that read simply, "You were right. J.W." I opened the journal to find Marek Kowalski's original paper, the one Walter had plagiarized. Next to it was a printed announcement that Blackwell University had quietly rescinded Walter's Lifetime Achievement Award due to previously unknown information about his scholarly contributions. The official investigation had been closed without public findings. Walter had retired with full emeritus status. I wasn't surprised. Institutions rarely acknowledge their failures openly. But as I placed Kowalski's paper on my bookshelf, prominently displayed where my students could see it, I felt a certain peace. I hadn't changed the system or even properly punished Walter. His reputation was damaged but not destroyed. He had lost some honors but kept his pension and his title. What I had done, however, was refuse to let truth become a negotiable commodity. In the universe of academic politics and institutional self-preservation, that small victory would have to be enough. As I prepared for my first graduate seminar at Princeton, I decided to begin with a discussion of ethical research practices. On the syllabus, I added Kowalski's paper, translated by me into English for the first time, giving long overdue credit to a brilliant economist whose voice had been silenced. Some might call it a hollow victory. Walter certainly would. He'd lost some prestige but retained most of his privileges. The system had protected him just enough to protect itself. But I had reclaimed my integrity, even at the cost of relationships and comfort, and perhaps, in some small corner of the academic world, truth had won a minor battle against appearance. It wasn't everything I'd hoped for when I stood at that podium with my damning evidence. But as I looked out at my new students, eager and unaware of the moral compromises that awaited them in their careers, I knew it was a start. Please like and subscribe for more great petty revenge stories. Let us know your thoughts about Elena's dilemma in the comments. Would you have exposed your colleague publicly?